So, episode 6 of Ahsoka is finally here, and wow, there is a lot of big things going on. So, let's get straight into the breakdown. We start the episode with the Pergols traveling through hyperspace, but notice how visually it looks very different from the usual design of hyperspace. Instead, this form of hyperspace looks really smooth, and on top of that, we can also see streaks of rainbow, which is something that never appeared in any previous hyperspace scenes. And this is something unique to intergalactic travel, something which we also see in a later scene as the hyperspace ring travels through space. Ahsoka and Huyang talk about the histories of the galaxy, and Huyang refers to them as part 1, 2, and 3, to which Ahsoka says that first was her favorite. Now this could be a reference to the origins of the Jedi, which is a trilogy that Star Wars has slated for release at some point, titled The Dawn of the Jedi. And so this scene could very well have been added in as a way to set up or hint at future Star Wars stories. On the other hand, this could also be a reference to the original trilogy, a sort of meta way of referencing them as they were technically the beginning of Star Wars itself, with A New Hope being the first and Ahsoka's favorite. Ahsoka tells Huyang about the truth of Sabine's decision, and Huyang advises caution in reaching the conclusion that Sabine failed. Ahsoka asks Huyang to tell her a story, and Huyang begins with,
"A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away,"
which really needs an explanation. Because if Huyang is beginning a story about the history of the galaxy with a galaxy far, far away, it could be referring to the idea that the origins of the Star Wars galaxy might have come from elsewhere, possibly another galaxy. Sabine wakes up in her cell and she reminds Baylan of their deal, and the hyperspace ring exits hyperspace, and for a very short brief moment you can see some heat markings as it makes its arrival. They arrive on Paradia, the original homeworld of the Dathomiri, and Morgan Elsbeth also mentions that the Dathomiri were among the first to harness the power of the Pergols, making them the earliest spacefarers in canon so far. Baylan also mentions that it is a graveyard for the Pergols, a place where they go to die, which is perhaps alluding to the fact that the world is also a graveyard for the Dathomiri people, something which we'll also see later. They make their way to the surface, and as they make their approach, we can also see a lot of statues with haunted expressions, mouths wide open, which really reminded me of Night Sister magic and the haunting images they give off in the Clone Wars. As they land, they're greeted by three figures who are known as the Great Mothers, matriarch of the Dathomiri people, and their names, I think, are pronounced Atropaw, Clotho, and Laxus. Previously, we had only known about Mother Talzin, who was the matriarch of the Night Sisters, so it's very interesting to know that there are more Great Mothers out there. It is also worth noting that the Great Mothers of Dathomiri are pretty powerful, using dark magic to harness a darker element of the Force. The Night Sisters are able to do incredible powerful things like crippling and poisoning Dooku from afar and raising the dead, to name a few. We also learned that the idea of calling to Morgan Elsbeth using Night Sister magic was also Thrawn's idea, which really goes to show how resourceful Thrawn can be. Shin makes a side remark,
"More witches,"
really just reminding us how much she hates witches, which might be something that plays into the finale. It is also worth noting that the Great Mothers are portrayed as a three, which is a reference to the Fates in Greek mythology, who are also portrayed as three ladies spinning the thread that is fate. So interesting parallels here. We then also learn what Baylan is truly after.
It repeats again and again.
And his rationale actually makes a lot of sense. Even before the events of the Rise of the Empire or the Clone Wars, the cycle of good and evil battling each other, winning over each other, can be traced all the way back since the very beginning. In fact, the purge of the Jedi Order that we see in the Revenge of the Sith wasn't even the first purging of the Order. Instead, there was also the first Jedi Purge, which took place almost 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, at least in Legends. Between that and the numerous other schisms and civil wars, there's no surprise that Baylan came to this conclusion, that in order for the cycle to be broken, he must find the beginning, which is an interesting goal that could signal the diverging paths that Baylan and Shin will take to that of Thrawn and the others. Then it finally happens. We see Thrawn's Star Destroyer, the Chimera, arrive, and you can see how it's really beaten up. Although repairs have been made, you can see the damages it received during the Battle of Lothal. There is also the iconic symbol of Thrawn, the Chimera underneath the Star Destroyer as well. And as we get closer, you can really get the sense of the scale of the Star Destroyer. The sheer presence of it is incredibly scary. And as we get closer to the Star Destroyer, we start to realize that as much as it might look like the Empire, it doesn't feel like the Empire. We then hear stormtroopers, now renamed as Night Troopers, chanting. And you can bet that these guys are no longer loyal to the Empire. Instead, these guys are Thrawn's own personal soldiers. Whatever they've been through or whatever obstacles they've gone through with Thrawn has clearly made them fanatics. It is also worth noting that their armor seems to be put together by bits and scraps, held together by red fabric, and the color variation also lets us know that resources were limited while Thrawn and his soldiers were in exile. We then are introduced to a special trooper and Thrawn's right-hand man by the name of Enoch. And the name Enoch is a reference to a biblical character of the same name. In the biblical stories, Enoch was the right-hand man of God, executing his decrees and chief of the archangels. So you can see why the name is appropriate here. And to make sure that we know he is different, the mask he has a completely different design, one that is more reminiscent of a Roman gladiator, in some ways a lot more menacing as well. Also, the sound design of his voice and the voice is incredibly metallic, which is either due to a replacement of his helmet mic or something more. And we have to talk about Thrawn. Lars Mikkelsen does an absolutely bang-up job here, and there is very little to complain about. Thrawn learns about Sabine, which the mothers call a loose thread, again echoing the imagery of the Fates. Thrawn is introduced to Baylan, and it's frightening that he immediately has knowledge on him, calling him General Baylan Skoll of the Jedi Order. Again, a testament to his immense knowledge. Baylan says he parted ways with the Jedi Order long ago, and Thrawn says,
"You would not be the first."
Which is really a reference to Anakin, as Thrawn was one of the few who knew Anakin before his turn to Vader, and also knew that Vader was Anakin during the era of the Empire. Sabine is brought before Thrawn and is given everything she asked for, which is a chance to find Ezra. And based on their interaction, you do get a sense that Thrawn is mocking her for making such a sentimental, rash decision, which is to risk the entire galaxy on the off chance that Ezra might still be alive, something which Sabine claims Thrawn doesn't understand, which is intended as a jab. Although given that Thrawn is going through all of this for the sake of his own people, the Chiss, he likely understands to some extent. Sabine is given a mount known as a Howler, which first appeared in the game Star Wars Jedi Knight Jedi Academy, although there are some major differences in the design. We then learn that Thrawn lets Sabine go because she wants to use her to find Ezra, so again, all of this is really one of Thrawn's schemes. Sabine is ambushed by nomads, and their armor is very interesting. If you take a closer look, their armor and style is very reminiscent of the armor in feudal Japan. The samurai-esque design and the Japanese conical hat really gives off the idea that these are wandering bandits. Sabine easily defeats them, but some of them do manage to escape. We see the Night Troopers load the bodies from the Dathomir catacombs, and one does have to wonder what they intend to do with it, or if there's more to the deal between Thrawn and the Great Mothers. Thrawn gives the order to send 2 attack squads, and Morgan Elsbeth questions if they should send more, and there's this moment where Thrawn waits before answering, almost as if he is assessing whether Morgan is someone worth explaining to before he ultimately decides to do so. It is such a neat little character detail that adds so much to his cool intelligence. Sabine scolds her mount, and together they find a creature known as Little Noti, who recognizes the symbol on Sabine's armor, understanding that she is a friendly, likely due to the experience with Ezra. We cut back to Baylan and Shin surveying the previous battle, and Shin asks if Baylan knows Ezra Bridgers. Baylan says no, and he refers to Ezra as
Comes from a breed of Boken Jedi trained in the wild.
which is a really interesting description. Now, this is the first time we've heard of it used in this way before, but in real life, Boken is actually the Japanese name for the wooden sword used in training, much like the one we saw Sabine use in an earlier episode. And so Baylan might be using this term to refer to Jedi such as Ezra or Luke who were brought up after the Jedi Order fell as a way to discount their Jedi membership. As a Boken could be described as a fake sword, a Boken Jedi might refer to a fake Jedi. And given Baylan's past, he might consider these Jedi to be fake as they weren't brought up within the Order. Baylan also tells Shin that he trained her to be something more. Shin calls Paradia a wasteland, but Baylan says that this was once the great witch kingdom of the Dathomiri, again another new piece of lore. Baylan tells Shin that he senses a greater power here, and the two encounter the bandits that attacked Sabine earlier. The creatures lead Sabine to their village, where we find a friendly, familiar face waiting, Ezra Bridger, and the actor of Ezra really has the voice of Ezra down to a T. And as the two get reacquainted, it's interesting to see how quickly they slip back to their old ways, with the two of them bickering like in the early days. Looking at Ezra, we can see how his clothes have drastically changed from the Battle of Lothal, and underneath his clothes there seems to be some chainmail peeking out. And it's not entirely certain how Ezra has been fighting all this time, considering that there doesn't seem to be a lightsaber or blaster on his side. Ezra starts to ask all sorts of questions about how Sabine got here, and Sabine basically dodges the question by telling him that she doesn't really want to talk about it. Ezra tells Sabine that he can't wait to go home, and you can just see the guilt on Sabine's face and the conundrum she's facing. Because for them, the only way for Ezra to return home would be for him to use Thrawn's Star Destroyer, ultimately defeating the very purpose he brought Thrawn here to Paradia in the first place. So you can see how this is going to be a bit of an awkward situation in the episodes moving forward. Thrawn learns about Ahsoka approaching using the Pergols, and Thrawn deduces that it must be Ahsoka, which Morgan says it's impossible, believing that Baylan killed her, and it's amazing how smart Thrawn is and how cautious he is. He immediately starts to look for information.
I want to know her background, history, homeworld, her master, everything.
Which is a really typical Thrawn move. He also says,
If a star whale approaches Paradia, destroy it with prejudice.
Which is a tongue-in-cheek moment, as the only time he really lost was to space-traveling whales. Now, he and Ahsoka have never actually met, so it's going to be interesting when they do. I've also come to realize that the reason why Morgan Elsbeth built a hyperspace ring wasn't just for traveling into a different galaxy. In fact, the hyperspace ring was constructed so that it could bring the Chimera back to the Star Wars galaxy. So there's a cool little detail here that I just realized. Anyways, that's all for this breakdown. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. As always, be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I'm the Lost Acolyte,
and I have spoken.